Except for the like really random brands. Pandemics really show you what people are about. They're like, I love seventh generation cleaning supplies. It's like, really, that's the only one left. When push comes to shove, you're going to grab the Clorox. Same thing for
makes
peanut butter. All the
makes
Jif
sense
was
to me.
gone. All the Jif was gone.
I do have to disappoint people who, after that intro, thought like this is going to be about real peanut butter. This is going to be about virtual peanut butter, so it's going to be way less interesting. Um, but we're going to talk about how to make investments, and I think I'll just start off with my point of view, and then I'd like to invite Kenny next. I think at GitLab, we have this great kind of set of categories on our homepage, like all the things we do. I think what we started doing as a company is like, oh, these are the things we do. So we're going to allocate some effort to each and every one of these. And that's not what we should have done. In hindsight, what we should have done is make sure we focus on the things that people use. So focus on the things that have a lot of active users, that have a lot of customer demand, that generate revenue. And we're now starting to do that. Product is doing a great job doing that. What I think is so we're stop peanut buttering, spreading our resources across all our categories. What is then logical to say is like, hey, we're gonna move our efforts towards those 80% of our effort in 20% of the categories. Let's also like get rid of some categories that we'll never be able to put that effort on for a long time. I think that's not what we should do. I think it's totally okay that there's a long tail of categories where we have half or one engineer on them. I think we have to be really clear about like how much effort we put on them. That's why if you go to our homepage, you'll see a button, maturity, and people can see for themselves whether it's minimal or whether it's complete. The reason for that is that our mission is everyone can contribute. We've never seen someone contribute something that wasn't in GitLab already. That is just very uncommon. It's really tough to kind of figure out how things fit together. And also if it's not there yet, people just, well, I don't even have to think of the reasons. It's just people won't contribute if something isn't there. So if we can kind of plow the earth and say, okay, this is something that is part of GitLab. In the future, we want to go here. That is super useful because suddenly there's a channel for the possible contributions, for customer requirements. Customers also, they will never say, oh, add this or that to your product. So the only way to uncover whether there's interest is to make an initial thing. And we've done that very successfully in, for example, Secure. I also wouldn't underestimate kind of the progress that one engineer can do. Normally we have back-end engineers with front-end engineers, with product managers and UX, and I think that gives for a very high quality of work. But if you can put just one engineer on something, then suddenly they don't need to communicate. Like everything can happen in their head and it can go so much faster. And we've seen that productivity, and DZ, my co-founder, is the canonical example. There's a couple of other examples, but I don't want to kind of make this into an engineering performance review, but we know of a few people who can just achieve magic by themselves. So I get the logic of like, hey, since we focus 80% of our efforts in 20% of our categories, let's get rid of a few. But I think we should be open to putting some minimal effort, a single engineer doing both front end and back end, and no UXers, no support, maybe a bit of quality support because it does need to be tested, because it has to be open to contributions, and even no PM help to kind of help them figure it out. And over time, because we need 7 years. So we need 7 years before some part of GitLab becomes really good. And that's a long time. So the sooner we start, the faster that goes. And there's just a different mode of operating for the parts of GitLab that are mature versus the ones that aren't. Kenny.
Okay, a couple of things. Let me start with, I would describe the peanut buttering that we've done as more a result of the fact that we had so many new categories, and we've kind of passed phase one of there's a whole bunch of new categories in this stage. Let's try them out and see what has stuck. And now we're performing that pivot to those specific categories as a result of having started with plowing the field and peanut buttering. I think there were some categories where we have just recognized there are places where I would say that category is not our what's next. And I think maybe there's part of my argument is there's not just prioritization of IACV, but also a what's next. Like I can't, I've made this argument about cluster cost optimization. I can't add an MVC for cluster cost optimization if I have very few cluster users. I can't add next steps for monitoring use cases if we don't even
Oh, I totally get it. So to take, I love that you're bringing in an example. In cluster cost optimization, you know what the first thing is we should build there? We should allow someone running a GitLab instance or a group good insight in how many runner minutes they used and of what type. That's not a cluster per se.
Yeah.
But that would be super, super helpful because like the motion we have with most customers is to use source control today. We want them to use Verify as well. But in order for them to use Verify, they need shared runners and they have a hard time kind of allocating those costs. So that's like the minimal next step there.
That feels a little bit like moving the goalposts because cluster cost optimization as a category, as an industry category means I'm trying to optimize the cost of my compute infrastructure. And now we're saying, oh, just this thing.
So let's call it cost optimization and get rid of the cluster word. And that way we're on solid ground again.
Okay. I think that there are, like, it is easy for us to suggest that we can continue to ship, but there are two things that you mentioned that I would take issue with. The first is that this can happen without product engagement. Like there's a lot of expectation, I guess, let me say, that because this is a product category, that product has a clear vision for what that category is going to be, that we have a kind of plan for where it's headed. And the idea that we would go pursue these kind of MVCs in categories without product engagement, I guess it doesn't seem to work in how our product system works today, in my mind.
Yeah, well, I think that the product system today assumes that that all the categories are equal and they each need a direction page and everything else. And I'd say everything needs a direction page, but the direction page can see, well, this is really early. We have one engineer and probably want to look at the timeline of this person to know what's going on.
And the second one is the notion that we split up groups by categories for engineers. And that is not something that I've experienced us to do in practice. So you suggested we shouldn't get into the engineering team optimization, but we don't have like, as far as my experience, individual like engineering mercenaries who are just working on that one topic repeatedly. We have, sorry, mercenaries is a military analogy. We don't have like those individual crack team members who are just working on one specific category. We have and direct as a product organization to like get maximum, what's the word, like wood behind the arrow by having more team members working to improve higher priority categories. And if we, even in a team member of 6 that is covering 5 categories, having one team member cuts their ability to deliver on something that's a higher priority by 15%.
Yeah. So my point is we'll need a few of those, and we won't. I think we're discussing like 4 categories or something like that, or 6. So it's interesting. Like, how would you structure this would it be a team member in an adjacent category, in an adjacent group kind of, that is just focused on something else? Or I think that makes sense. But it's tough. It doesn't fit within our structure. And that's kind of like, yeah, our structure is really good for the stuff we want to invest a ton in. It doesn't work for the ones that are on this kind of solo contributor still stage. And that's why there's two solutions. Like, one is just cut them. So we're not annoyed anymore. And my point is we shouldn't cut them. But I agree that like our process is kind of too much overhead to justify it.
Well, I took your argument to be that not only do we want to keep them, but we want to do them now. And I think my suggestion is we should kind of have just-in-time category delivery, that we can delay calling it a category and working on it till we think important and a priority. And I get that we have to have the pressure to consider product expansion and breadth a priority. Otherwise, we're going to focus on depth. But if the assertion is not that we should do it now, but that we should maintain them and make sure that we're making progress on them, I agree. And I think in some of the categories cases, I'm saying I think this is an important milestone for us to have. Digital experience monitoring is one of those like important stake for us to make sure we're communicating that we're after, not sequentially right now, but we will get after it eventually. Cluster cost optimization is another one of those. I think it's important that we move after it, but not sequentially. But there are other ones that I think we're just not really investing in heavily. Chaos engineering is not one that I think is an important one for us to be focused on in the near term.
Yep. I don't disagree. And with cluster cost optimization, it's actually like still a big question mark whether people can do that kind of in a multi-cloud way, because a lot of the optimization tools you find, they are specific to a certain cloud provider. So yeah. it might just not be feasible to do that in a multi-cloud way. And that would be the only way in which we can do a lot with a few people. Otherwise it gets to be a ton more work. So not sure about that one. The reason to push is because the simplest reason is to the homepage. We always right now it says, oh, this is the stuff we'll do in the future, and that's rare that a company does that, and there's going to be increasing pressure to not do that anymore. And I
where's that pressure coming from? Mind sharing?
What company do you know of that has their roadmap on their homepage?
No, nobody.
Yeah, so
it's like we've all seen those presentations where the slide deck says, "Hey, everything I'm saying here is not true," before they present their roadmap. And I love the fact that we do it. I'm just, are you saying, as we get larger and larger, the expectation will be that we don't?
Yeah, I think it was a temporary thing as we drove a broader product, and I think that's been super successful. But at some point, we just have to cut it back to just show what's there. It doesn't feel good to promise it tomorrow when there's things on there now that maybe we should cut. Maybe we shouldn't do cluster cost optimization. So maybe we should just cut from the homepage, because otherwise you'll have stuff there that you don't have a line of sight to shipping.
Yeah, and my kind of counter proposal was remove any feature categories from the homepage, continue to coach and lean in with our team members and product managers about the importance of tilling the soil and prioritizing breadth, enable them to make a decision about whether or not, if it's something that they consider a priority, they should keep around or not. I think, especially in some of the ops section stages, there will always be new categories, and we'll be realigning categories, and we'll have this we created alert management and said we were going to make it a category and are shipping in an MVC within a quarter. those kinds of things where we make those adjustments. So I always want to have the ability to have new categories and pursue new categories. I'm mostly arguing that the like seed we've been trying to put in the product manager's brain is to also prioritize depth, to have some sense of focus and like make sure that you're working on the most effective thing. And it feels like kind of a step backwards for us to say, no, let's make sure we ship all MVCs immediately, even though those have been hanging out there for a while and haven't been shipped for good reason, presumably.
Yeah, I agree. So that's it's just valid, and it's the tension here. What I've seen is that there's not been a good cleanup of like the future stuff. We have some things hanging out there that we already know we're not going to do, like PKI, cluster cost optimization. We're probably not going to do. So why are they still there? But also, I've just seen that the MVC is pretty big. Like there's just stuff that could have been done in 2 weeks that is taking us 2 months. And that's also, I want to kind of challenge the organization to think small. This is GitLab. We don't think big, we think small. So, and also a bit of that is maybe, I don't know, let's call it vanity, but it's also a bit like, hey, we want to make sure we communicate our kind of vision, even though we're only going to show stuff that at least has something in here. And yeah, it's orthogonal to the, yeah, I don't, but I understand the problem it is for messaging. And I kind of look forward to kind of figuring each of these. There's no one fit answer, and I want to kind of figure out these categories one by one, because yeah, some of them we shouldn't ship, but I think a few we should do something small and get them on the homepage and be done with it.
And frankly, that's why I like the proposal that I put forward that puts it into the hands of the PM that says by the end of this quarter, you either need to ship an MVC or remove this. Like we should get in the mindset of not having categories for very long. That makes them say like, have I really thought of something minimal? And I'll be on the hook for challenging when we want to remove a category. Like, did you actually think of the most minimal thing here before we decided we should not pursue it? And then we'll have those dialogues if we remove them. And if not, we'll get into the habit of let's have a category, think of something minimal and ship it quickly as opposed to letting it linger for.
Yeah. We can make the goal like either ship it this quarter or remove it. But I do want to be involved because all in all, I think we're not thinking small enough, and I want to kind of challenge the organization to ship something smaller. So but I think we should have that conversation about each specific category.
Yeah, cool. And we will, as a part of the category removal or adjustment process, we require that.
No, it's not it's the ship the homepage initiative. And some of them won't be shipped and we'll remove them. That's fine.
Sorry,
but it's not
if the PM says I want to remove it, they have to get approval from me, Scott, you, like
yeah, but we already know that that there's going to, well, I already know I have opinions, so I don't want someone to make an MR and then at final approval, it's get stuck. Let's have a proactive conversation about each one of them.
Cool, we'll do.
5 minutes left, y'all.
So could
Scott?
so it sounds like, is it okay to just call this an initiative, keep it in the issue and remove the OKR so that we don't send the wrong message? We still want, for the most part, PMs to be thinking about the core areas and driving SMAL and all that. And then for projects where we believe the answer is to remove it, maybe we could set up a 25-minute call with you, Sid, so that we can debate that. If you have ideas for how to make it smaller, we could consider those before we remove it.
Okay, well, I'm not that set on having it in the OKR, so if that's the problem, as long as we get some movement on these things and we get there's a bit of an anxiety to kind of ship something minimal, and that's super worrying. So we got to get over that, where it's celebrated. The advantage of shipping something minimal is seen, and then it's not seen. I keep hearing breadth versus depth, and it's not versus. It's you can have a big breadth and invest that in some things. That's it's not equal. Like it's an exponential curve, and that's, I mean, that's the change of tone we need, because otherwise it's the direction of GitLab will be to never add any new categories again. And that's not where we should be. So how can we make sure that we don't hear breadth versus depth anymore? And that people start talking about the long tail.
Yeah, I'll take an MR to do it. Obviously, handbook page update is not the only way to do it, but it's explicitly written in our handbook, our opinions on breadth. I think it says versus depth. So I'll make sure to clarify that, and then we can communicate to the product team.
And I'm not sure what we should call it, but we should have a kind of a positive word for kind of put your effort where the smile is, or whatever you want to call it. I fully support that.
Yep. Yeah, so to be clear, I like the idea of making small bets, and we should be sprinkling that in. I think what you're feeling now, Sid, is we've made a bunch of bets over the last 24 months. We're now, and we can't hire as many people as we thought, so we're putting majority on core areas. And I think the PM directors are signaling that they don't have as much room to place bets as we might like. I imagine the pendulum will shift back and forth.
No, I think it's just reduce the cost of the bet, make smaller bets. That should be our message. Still make them, but make them smaller.
Okay. All right. Let's use these category by category discussions to discuss the right next step, whether it's to close it or come up with a maybe as even smaller MVC than the PM is currently envisioning.
Cool.
Sound okay?
Yep.
All right. Kenny.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.